Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking from Washington, D.C. We have a kind of a midsummer edition of our program this week. Next week, of course, we have August 15th, the Feriae Augustae, the midsummer holiday, decreed back in the Roman Empire, still big in Italy, France, Spain, Portugal, Southern Europe, Bavaria. Places like this tend to shut down on August 15th, the Ascension of the Virgin Mary. And, we'll mark it with a certain amount of background material. I'd step back from the day-to-day stuff and talk about the background of Mitt Romney, talk about the tradition, Bishop Romney's tradition. We have to know where he comes from. He says he loves his faith, the faith of his fathers. Oh, how interesting. Let's learn more about that. Let's learn more about the tradition he comes from, right? They say biography is destiny, tradition is destiny. Maybe if that's the case with Mitt Romney, we can learn something. Certainly people would say with Mad Dog Bush the Younger, we needed to know more about his particular background, right? His alcoholism, dry drunk status, and then how his born-again Christianity was used to get him out of that, or at least stabilize him so that he could become president. How about that? So we want to know all those things. But going back with some historical depth. Now, we are looking at Syria, and we have a big development. Today, it's hats off to Pakistan. Go Pakistan. Long live Pakistan, and congratulations to the Pakistan foreign minister. This is Hina Rabbani Khan, and she has appeared in Tehran today being Friday, August 10th. Tehran is the scene of a conference on Syria. This is the answer to those horrible Friends of Syria conferences that have been going on now for several months, that have been vexing world public opinion. Today it is the Tehran Consultative Summit on Syria, a modest title. Several foreign ministers of big important countries showed up. Salehi of Iran, actually, Ahmadinejad showed up. We'll talk about what he had to say. But let's go through this conference, because I've been monitoring various Western media this morning. They don't say a word about it. There's nothing on Al Jazeera about this. There's nothing on National Public Radio. They don't want to tell you this. And the news is Pakistan is supporting Syria. Pakistan is warning against the dangers of foreign meddling into Syria. So, Pakistani Foreign Minister Hina Rabbani Khan is saying the following, and I quote, "It is our considered view, Pakistan, that any outside intervention would further complicate an already very complex situation. It must be avoided," she said at this summit, which was attended by about 30 countries. Now, that's a big deal. When they do report that, they're going to be hysterical. They're going to be absolutely apoplectic and tongue-tied. A very big, important country, and in the region, has thrown its support on the side of Russia, China, Iran, and Syria. And you'll remember a week or two ago, we did an analysis of the vote in the United Nations General Assembly on the anti-Syrian resolution, and you'll remember that it was about 2/3 of the world supporting the imperialist resolution, and of course that included a lot of banana republics, let us say, but a whole series of big important countries said no, and when you added the no votes, the abstentions, and the countries that simply didn't show up, they were not going to put themselves on the line but they were certainly not supporting the resolution, right? Because if you could support the resolution, you'd show up. They didn't. They didn't show up. With that, you got up to about 60 countries, and with the membership in the United Nations at about 194 or 195, 60 countries is about 1/3 of the world. So, and when you've got Russia, and when you've got China, and when you've got India and Pakistan also, I think, abstained on that vote. Certainly South Africa did. Then you're not isolated. The big news is Syria is not isolated. Syria is less isolated. And, of course, it means the failure, the ignominious failure of the hysterical witches of aggression, Hillary Clinton, Susan Rice, Victoria Nuland, right? These three Eumenides of aggression. They've been rebuffed. Look what has happened on Hillary Clinton's watch. This is a real failure. Resign, resign, we would say to Hillary Clinton if we saw her passing in the street. So Pakistan supports Syria against foreign attack. It means no fly zone, no humanitarian corridors, no invasions, no nothing. Now here's who came to the conference, and I think this is in some ways an honor roll. Let's see if we can go through the list. Pakistan was there. Of course, Iran was the host country. Russia, China, Belarus, Mauritania, Indonesia, there's a big one, Kyrgyzstan, Georgia, Turkmenistan, Benin, Sri Lanka, also quite important, Ecuador, Afghanistan, what an affront to the U.S., Algeria, important now because of a number of things, Iraq, Zimbabwe, Oman. Hey, Oman. Is Oman peeling off from the lunatic coalition of the Sabahs? Well, maybe the Sabahs, maybe not the Sabahs even, the Khalifas and the Thanis? The Khalifas and the Thanis are going whole hog. The Sauds, the Khalifas, and the Thanis are whole hog for aggression. Sabah, we don't seem to hear from them. Sultan Qaboos of Oman seems to be having second thoughts. Venezuela, the leading country in Latin America from some points of view. Tajikistan, India, a huge presence. Kazakhstan, Armenia, Nicaragua, Cuba, sentimental favorite for many, Sudan, Jordan, Tunisia, and Palestine. Now, this could also mean a moment of reflection by the Palestinian Authority, right? By Abu Mazen there, that it's time to not be a member of the imperialist coalition. So that is quite a list, and naturally, nothing but scorn coming from the West. Let me just quote Mrs. Minister Carr again. She says, Syria needs political space to find a peaceful solution and reestablish its societal equilibrium. By engaging all sides, Syria must forge its own destiny in accordance with the aspirations of its people. So, no NATO bombing, says Pakistan. Quite a moment. Now, this conference had been announced at short notice yesterday by, actually Wednesday, by Iranian Foreign Minister Salehi with an op-ed in the Washington Post, where he pointed to the agitation in Bahrain, how there's a democracy movement in Bahrain that is being ignored by the West, crushed by Saudi enforcement troops. We've got armed extremists coming into Syria, and I'll give you a couple of other points from Salehi's WAPO editorial op-ed here in just a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We are celebrating the successful holding of this conference. I think this is a turning point. The Tehran Consultative Summit on Syria marks an important step forward in the coalescence of a resistance front against the mad dog imperialists of NATO. The mad dog Anglo-American imperialists have conjured up, they've invented it, they've forced it into existence against the will of many of the participants, I might add, but it's there, the Tehran Consultative Summit on Syria. This, in some ways, builds on the basis of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It builds on the basis of the BRICS, but now it's getting specific, and it's quite a group of states once again. You know, you got Russia, China, India. You've got quite a bit of the world, and you add in Indonesia and some of these other places. This is really a big deal. And of course, congratulations to Pakistan for taking this strong position. Congratulations to Iran for organizing the conference. Congratulations to Russia and China for the strong front in the Security Council. Again, let me just go through this. This is quite a list. Iran, Pakistan, Russia, China, Belarus, Mauritania, Indonesia, Kyrgyzstan, Georgia, Turkmenistan, Benin, Sri Lanka, Ecuador, Afghanistan, Algeria, Iraq, Zimbabwe, Oman, Venezuela, Tajikistan, India, Kazakhstan, Armenia, Nicaragua, Cuba, Sudan, Jordan, Tunisia, and Palestine. That's the anti-imperialist front on Syria, and that was a great idea, apparently from Salehi, who announced it this Wednesday, 2 days before it happened. He announced it on Wednesday. It happened on Friday, saying that we remember the Lebanese civil war. We don't want this in Syria. We're looking at Bahrain. We're looking at the repression of peaceful protesters, and that's actually they are pro-democracy. They're anti-monarchist. Armed extremists are pouring into Syria, says Salehi. Syria is a beautiful mosaic of ethnic and religious groups. I would confirm that. I've seen that on the ground. I've talked about it. Salehi proposes a three-step process. First, a ceasefire, obviously. At that point, Free Syrian Army killers, Al-Qaeda butchers, say, no, we're into killing. We don't want a ceasefire. Secondly, it has to be humanitarian aid, obviously overdue. Thirdly, a dialogue. And again, Free Syrian Army, Syrian National Council say, no, we don't talk to anybody. We've been appointed by the State Department. The U.S. Institute of Peace talks to us. We're the legitimate government of Syria. Well, sorry, boys. And therefore, Iran gets credit for convoking the meeting. Ahmadinejad, in his speech, says the colonialist powers, good, call them by their names. This is what they are. The colonialist powers talk about humanitarianism as their motivation, but frankly, to boil it down, they're seeking loot. And then he goes through in Afghanistan, the first thing they wanted to know is where are the valuable mines so they could start looting them. In Iraq, they did something similar. He makes fun of the U.S. The U.S. is a bankrupt power surviving on other people's money. The U.S. is the equivalent of an athlete who gets by on doping, while 3 billion people across the world live in abject poverty. Now, there's, I think, the relevant point, that there are 3 billion people plus, or by different measures, you get different figures, but that's the magnitude. It's about half of everybody when you boil it down. So, this is a big moment. Now, we're going to be looking for more reports from this conference. Now, I think the demand coming out of this conference in Tehran is that there should be a ceasefire. In particular, they're looking at the end of Ramadan. Right, the end of the festival of Ramadan is, as I understand it now, in about 10 days. It's the 10th. It's around the 20th of August that it ends, and then you have the holiday of Eid, and then that's when a number of things are likely to happen. What the Tehran conference is suggesting is, why not use the end of Ramadan and the Eid holiday to have a ceasefire? The U.S. State Department has freaked out in response to the Tehran conference. Oh, brutal murder. Assad commits brutal murder. Well, says Victoria Nuland, her hands dripping with blood. There is now a new negotiator for the Arab League and the United Nations. This is Ibrahimi of Algeria. He calls for the unity of the Security Council. I'm sure he knows better than that. We'll be interested to see what he does. Maybe in this new situation, his job will actually be easier than well, you get the idea that if you actually have a group of 30 countries that actually want peace, and they're big, important ones like the ones we've mentioned, then maybe it is possible to force the West to back down, because that's what it'll take. The Anglo-American mad dog imperialists, the NATO imperialists have to back down. They've got to stop supporting these death squads, and at that point, the death squads will be essentially part of history. The death squads, in the meantime, have been defeated. They were defeated in Damascus after the July 18th shock and awe attempt, Operation Damascus Volcano. Looks like the death squads are now defeated in Aleppo. The death squads have been driven out of the main neighborhoods of Aleppo. How interesting that the United Nations, Hanky Panky Banky, and his crew say, oh, there's no winner and no loser in Syria. Wait a minute. Just at the moment when the Assad government emerges as the winner, the UN is there to muddy the waters and tell you that there is no winner. Well, there will be a winner one way or the other, and right now it looks like Assad. We've got the British Foreign Secretary Haig, Colonel Blimp, announcing more meddling by the withered mummy of imperialism on the banks of the Thames. Why don't you go to the Olympics, Haig, and contemplate some athletics rather than the gymnastics and contortions that you're going through with your policy. So Haig is interested in backing the Syrian death squads, but only with non-lethal aid, of course. Public relations, stuff like that. We have Hillary Clinton. Now, this is the other one. Hillary will be in Turkey tomorrow. That's Saturday, the 11th of August. She will be cavorting and consorting with the Al-Qaeda death squads. Hillary, you can see her concern. She feels that if she can't bring the Syrian destabilization to a successful conclusion in the form of regime change, that her stock will be tarnished. She wants to run for president, but she's got to show that not only is she a warmonger, but that she's a successful aggressor and warmonger. And that means bringing down Assad. So that's what she'll be looking for in Turkey. More on this in just a second on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Keep up with everything at tarpley.net, tarpley.net. Always new postings. This week, postings from Alex Jones, postings from Press TV, posting of my speech at the New World Fair there at the Unisphere in Flushing Meadow in New York City. Always new things, and to keep up with it minute to minute, hour by hour, Webster G. Tarpley, Twitter feed. So keep up and check the books that are offered for sale. We'll probably have something highly relevant to the U.S. presidential campaign. Talk about that in the second half of the program. Hillary Clinton will be going to Turkey on Saturday, August 11th, to consort with Al-Qaeda death squad representatives. She feels that this is an important way to advance her presidential prospects for the contest in 2016. This is a somewhat tortured logic, but that's Hillary for you. She wants to be a big warmonger, and this, I think, her entire tenure at the State Department is now under a cloud. This Tehran Consultative Summit is exactly the kind of thing that she's supposed to prevent. So the other thing, her tenure may be marked by the fall of the reactionary, feudal, absolutist Gulf monarchies. Feudal and absolutist might seem to be contradictory, but they're not. They get the worst of each in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, and in Bahrain. The Sauds, the Thanis and the Khalifas managed to do that. Right, it wasn't possible in early modern Europe, but it's being done in the Gulf today. We had a very important piece of analysis presented on Press TV, and let me just go back. This report has a kind of a history of its own. Last Monday, we had David Ignatius. We sometimes cite him, right? He's one of the main journalistic speaking tubes of the U.S. State Department, and when they want to put out a line, they give it to Ignatius. His article from this past Monday is Saudi Arabia a kingdom on the brink? And he talks about Prince Bandar in the article as if he's alive. Well, he may be alive, or he may not be alive. We're still looking for straws in the wind on that one, but you do get the idea. That's David Ignatius, and at the end of it, he cited Press TV. Quite an interesting moment, because usually this is boycotted. And the report that he's talking about is precisely Ali Al-Ahmed, who is a representative of something called the IGA, and this was some days ago in Press TV. And Ali Al-Ahmed, it seems to me, gives a very important insight into the situation in Saudi Arabia. He says that at the end of Ramadan, in about 10 days, there will be a big upsurge in the rebellion, in the demonstrations, the protests in Saudi Arabia. So that's coming, right? As soon as the Ramadan fasting is concluded, then there will be an upsurge, and this is on the technical end of Ramadan is Sunday, the 19th of August, according to various sources on the internet. So the 19th of August, 9 days from today, that's when things may begin to pop. And he also says, again, Ali Al-Ahmed, speaking to Press TV, that the royals are splitting. This is interesting. This congeries, right, this gaggle called the Saudi royal family, the House of Saud, right? It's a huge mass of parasitical princes, people who, they go all around the world. Their sybaritic hedonism is notorious in all sorts of places. We don't need to go into this. They're corrupt. They're decadent. Some of them are even degenerate. That's the importance of Bandar, is that he's the one political operative they seem to have, as Ignatius says, an experienced covert operative, and with his fighter pilot persona, he can get along with the U.S. and other military bullet heads. So that's Bandar. But if he's not around, then they really are in trouble. And the word from Ali Al-Ahmed is that the royal family is dividing into factions. We know from our close reading of Plato's Republic that when you have an oligarchy ruling a country, generally speaking, the main way you can get rid of them is if they divide. If they remain compact and united, it's very much harder to get rid of them, although not impossible. Not when it's something as grotesque as a feudal monarchy in the middle of the 21st century. But still, if they split, that's a good sign that something may actually happen. We're also told that there have been more demonstrations in Riyadh and in Medina in Saudi Arabia. So the capital, Riyadh, and Medina, one of the holy cities. All very interesting and likely to escalate now towards the end of August. Take that one very, very seriously and do whatever you can to publicize this. Remember, this is a real revolutionary movement. If you say down with the House of Saud, down with this monstrous monarchy installed by the British, right, reactionary, on the wrong side of everything, you name it, they're on the wrong side of it. They deserve support from the West, the people that are trying to assert some concept of humanity against these feudal monsters in the Saudi Arabian royal family, and Qatar, and Bahrain, and, don't forget Kuwait, don't forget the United Arab Emirates, and, Oman. Well, if they want to survive, let them do something good. But you get the idea. And Jordan, and Morocco. Those are the main absolute monarchies or quasi-absolute monarchies left in the world. Again, you haven't had that in Britain since 1688. You haven't had it in France really since 1815 or 1789 or 1815, depending on how you want to look at it. But certainly, we don't need it in the world today. Now, a couple of other things from inside Syria. The Washington Post tells us that the Syrian death squads are not happy with the U.S. They increasingly resent the U.S. They say, where are our weapons? Where's our artillery? Where are our tanks? Where are our shoulder-fired missiles? Our money? So the death squads, the Al-Qaeda killers of Syria, are saying to the American taxpayer, ante up, Joe Sixpack, or we'll get you later. Oh, my heavens. So this is supposed to be a motivation for the U.S. to give them more. How interesting. On the other side, one of the top warlords, one of the main death squad leaders of the Free Syrian Army, has been killed inside Syria. This is the head of something called Ayman Lifo. This individual has been liquidated, and you can look at Press TV. They're quite well informed about what's going on inside Syria, and they'll tell you which neighborhoods are actually being fought over, and so forth. So again, depends on the sport you're playing, but in baseball, 3 strikes and you're out. 1 strike is the inability of the death squads to smash the Syrian regime after the July 18th terror attack that killed the defense minister. The 2nd strike is that they can't hold on to Aleppo. And the 3rd strike now is the Tehran Consultative Summit on Syria. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. 2 more important points about Syria, lest we forget them. One is the death squads spread reports this week that they had successfully assassinated a Russian general, allegedly advising the Assad Baath Party government. The general in question, General Kujaev, appeared, I believe, in Moscow and said, no, I'm not dead at all. I'm doing fine here. At the same time, the death squads did have a passport that looked pretty much like General Kujaev. So what are we left with? Some have concluded from this that there are Russian officers helping the defense of the Syrian government. We had stories when those bombs went off on July 18th. Reports came that some Russian officers had been killed or wounded in those attacks. This has not gone anywhere that I know of, and I think we can probably assume that there are Russian advisors, just as there are NATO, CIA, U.S. Special Forces crawling all over the death squads. French Special Forces officers reported captured in the past week. Turkish and Saudi Special Forces officers reported captured. The Syrian government never puts them on public display. I guess that's a decision they've made. Maybe they ought to consider the other side of that, right? It might be more important for world public opinion to show them and then release them, not let them become an excuse for an attack, for an extraction, Desert One, that kind of thing. But certainly show them. The other one is we have Brennan, the terror czar in the Obama regime, visiting the Wall Street fat cats at the Council on Foreign Relations. He was asked, well, whatever happened to our no-fly zone? And Brennan's response to that was, we never took the no-fly zone off the table. We're still actively considering a no-fly zone. I think, from where I'm looking, that has gotten less likely thanks to the Tehran Consultative Summit on Syria. And we'll have to, however, maintain vigilance on that front. You've also got a flurry of warmonger statements coming from the Israelis, right? We've got Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Oren, saying time is running out for diplomacy on Iran. Well, vigilance on that one too. And remember also, when the imperialists are defeated, right, when they lose a few, they don't like that. They're not used to that. They've been winning unjustifiably for quite a while. That's when they can do flights forward, right? They can do a flight forward. You know, Hillary Clinton could say, oh, well, if my secretaryship is collapsing thanks to the Tehran conference, then the only thing I can do is become a voice for immediate war. That's Hillary Clinton. That's her qualification for the president. Don't call her at 3 o'clock in the morning. Any morning, she'll always screech that she wants war. Now, shifting gears, shifting into U.S. domestic. We've got Romney, Mitt the Nit, who is now at the point of announcing his vice presidential candidate. We had a very interesting moment this week where the Drudge Report, the, I guess, reactionary news aggregator site on the internet, posted a very interesting report. It's their own report saying Obama told a Democratic Party fat cat fundraiser, and the setting for this is a Democratic fundraiser for Obama, because that's where he appears. That's the only way you ever get to talk to him, is if you're giving him money. Obama has allegedly told a top Democratic moneybags that he, Obama, believes that Romney wants to choose General David Petraeus for the vice presidency. That's General David Petraeus, 4-star general, dominant personality of the Pentagon for the past several years, the author of the Counterinsurgency Guide of the U.S. Forces, a great success, to be sure, irony. And then after being the commander in Afghanistan, we see how well that's going, right? I think about 30 NATO forces have been killed just in the last week or two as a result of getting killed by the Afghan forces they were training. Anyway, then Petraeus got out of the Pentagon and went on to the CIA. So Petraeus, I've pointed to this in the past. Take a look at Tarpley.net. I have taken the liberty of bumping up some of my older stories, a flurry of them about 2 years ago. June, July 2010, I did a report on Russia Today. There's a report on the question of Bonapartism, a longer article. I remember doing a broadcast in Italy on Radio Popolare about that. You can find all that on the website. The idea being Bonapartism, in other words, where the generals take over the government. And when the generals take over the government, the other angle on Bonapartism, it's not just military people taking over the government, but it's the idea of a government that tends to detach itself from society and claim that it's representing an interest above the groups in society, which under democratic conditions, government can't do. Government has got to represent groups in the society. It's got to cater to them. It's got to deliver something. Naturally, with Bonapartism in the U.S. today, it's clear that there is one group that's being represented, except it's a very small one. It's Wall Street, zombie bankers, hedge fund hyenas, but that's the tendency. So we don't know what Romney will do. Petraeus has said he won't run. Yeah, fine. He's not going to run. He's going to accept a draft. He may be named, and he may say, no, my work at the CIA is so important that I won't go out campaigning. All right, fine, don't go out campaigning. Right? We've known for months that Obama fears the Petraeus nomination. Actually, Obama feared Petraeus as the Republican candidate for president more than anybody. That would have been very, very difficult for Obama to beat. But now Petraeus as vice president is something that he fears a great deal, and that's why he's telling his fat cat supporters about this. I think that part is real. There really is a fear of Petraeus. It's all everything that Romney doesn't have, right? Not greedy, right? Not rich, probably rich by now, but not, living for money. Military service, oh yeah. War hero, I guess that's what you'd have to call him these days. And then intelligence, foreign experience, all the things Romney doesn't have. Romney, of course, a warmonger who never volunteered. His sons never volunteered. So the chicken hawk label, the neocon chicken hawk label, fits in this case. So if Romney names Petraeus, and it's thought that this is going to happen probably next week, that is to say, certainly by about the 20th of August, the Republican convention begins in Tampa, I think, on the 29th of this month. So we're now getting down to the Republican convention. Sorry, it's the 27th. The Republican convention is from the 27th to the 30th of August in Tampa, Florida. So if Romney's going to get a good hype bump out of this, whoever he's going to name, this has to be fairly soon. It's thought that he's going to wait until the end of the Olympics. Once the Olympics are off the screen, he feels he'll get more attention for his vice presidential candidate. Right? You got to wait for the closing ceremonies of the Olympics. If it's Petraeus, this means Bonapartism. This means austerity enforced by the Army and the CIA. Let's get it straight. There are other possibilities. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome to the second hour of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking from Washington, D.C. here in our midsummer program. Here we're marking next week the Feriae Augusti, the midsummer holiday. So step back and take a look at some trends. Certainly the Tehran Consultative Summit on Syria is a landmark event taking place today, Friday, in Tehran. Now, we're looking forward to Romney naming his vice presidential candidate, the running mate, to share the ticket with him. And interestingly enough, the Drudge Report focused on Petraeus as a possible choice. Take a look at all of that is up on Tarpley.net. I would take that very, very seriously. Petraeus, of course, says no, he's not interested, and others say no, and pundits say impossible. Just a couple of other possible choices. We've got Congressman Marco Rubio, Senator Marco Rubio, representing the virulently anti-Castro Cuban community there in Miami, the right-wing Cubans who stand apart from the other Hispanics because of this right-wing political take that they have. The word is, of course, that Rubio spent 10 years as a Mormon, and two Mormons on the ticket, maybe one Mormon too many. Then we've got Christie. We've talked about him over the months, right? Governor of New Jersey. The Garden State Goering, New Jersey's answer to Reichsmarschall Hermann Goering, the number 2 of the Nazi regime. He's a bully, he's a thug, he's nasty, he insults women, contempt for voters, arrogant, elitist, all kinds of things with that guy. In terms of austerity enforcers, Christie would enforce with bluster and, of course, also with repression. Petraeus would be a more sophisticated thinking man's police state operative. Then we have the current Ohio Senator Portman. Portman was a hack for Bush the Younger. He presided over the deficit spending, which so many reactionaries equate with original sin. On the other hand, it's getting down to the point where they say there might be a congressional district in Ohio where he's well known, and the whole election might indeed turn on some congressional district in Ohio. Then we have the perennial hack Pawlenty, still trying to hawk himself, certainly on his way to getting some kind of a job from Romney. Bobby Jindal, of Indian origin, the arch-reactionary, born-again Christian fanatic governor of Louisiana. And, the Hjalmar Schacht of the Republican Party. That would be Paul Ryan, the main economic theorist of the Republicans. He, of course, is the author of a Schachtian budget. He is the main representative of austerity psychosis in the U.S. House of Representatives, wants to replace Medicare with a voucher, wants to cut all the social service programs, tax cuts for the rich, tax increases for the poor, and ballooning deficits, too, at the same time. Shows the hypocrisy of the Republicans. The Washington Post wants you to know that the Elmer Gantry equivalent, former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, now making money on television, is not in contention. Condoleezza Rice, former Secretary of State, not in contention, they say. This had been the previous, a couple of weeks ago, Drudge Report had puffed up her. South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, I think also of Indian origin. New Mexico Governor Susana Martinez, no, they say not her. There's also Senator Ayotte, a woman from New Hampshire, who might be considered. Anyway, this is coming soon, and the important thing is that you read from it something of the demagogic profile that they want to put forward. We should also mention that in the various primaries of the last week or two, the fascist wing of the Republican Party, the out-and-out fascists, not even reactionaries now, but militant lunatics, have come forward. Ted Cruz of Texas and Todd Akin in Missouri. These are militant reactionaries, and that means fascists. Todd Akin says that having federal government-assisted student loans is a step towards socialism. It is socialism. It's communism, according to him. He also wants to privatize Medicare and so forth. So we wish ill luck to these characters as they go forward. We've also got a bit of an emergency. The U.S. Corn crop, because of the drought, because of this situation of lack of rain and high temperatures in the Midwest of the U.S., we have the smallest corn crop in 6 years. One of the things you should immediately do is stop the insanity of ethanol. Stop converting corn into fuel and be using that as gasoline. That is a boondoggle whose time has passed. What you should do instead of that is to reinstate the parity system, go to 110% of parity. Normally it would be 100% of parity. Right now I think we're at about 30 to 40% in terms of the price. We need 110% of parity on an emergency basis to restore what has been depleted and destroyed. For family farmers, and I stress family farmers, we need an immediate debt freeze and 0% credit coming through the Federal Reserve at gunpoint, if you will, 0% credit to facilitate the winter wheat planting, because that's coming up soon now. What you've got at the end of the summer is the planting of the winter wheat seeds that will become the wheat crop next spring to early summer. So we got to start thinking about that. So again, 110% of parity, a debt moratorium for family farmers, and 0% credit for the winter wheat planting and then for the spring planting after that. Obviously also, if you can build irrigation, you should do it at 0%, and we need the long-term water project the NAWAPA, North American Water and Power Alliance. Things of this sort ought to be started. This will not be the immediate remedy, but it's the only remedy as time goes on. So this is what's going on. Now, let's switch into Romney, and let's go into the background of Romney. And this has to do with the Mormons. Romney is a dedicated Mormon, and this is, it seems to me, a very legitimate issue, because this church that he belongs to has notoriously had a very strong political identity. Any church like, say, the Roman Catholic Church, any of the Protestant churches, can always say, well, we follow St. Paul when St. Paul says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God what belongs to God. That, of course, is a strong tradition here in the Western world. Indeed, according to Dante, that is the essence of the Western world, right? That the Pope is one person, the king or the emperor is a separate person. They often fight. So with that, you have division of powers. The Mormon Church, as we'll hear in a minute, denies all of that. They say the only acceptable approach is theocracy. That means throwing out the lessons of the wars of religion here in the West. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Keep up with everything at Tarpley.net. Keep up with everything minute to minute, hour to hour at Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. And now we've got to address this question of Romney as an emanation of the Mormon Latter-day Saints establishment. He's obviously backed up by a clique of very rich Mormons that include the Marriott family, the Huntsman family, and some others, and of course his own family, with the father being head of American Motors, and Romney himself being this fabulously wealthy asset stripper. This is important, but then we've also got to look at the longer view. Romney is adamant that he is in this Mormon tradition. He is, after all, a bishop. A bishop may not be, in the Mormon parlance, exactly what it might be, say, for a Lutheran or a Roman Catholic. A bishop in Roman Catholic or Lutheran or other Episcopal is a relatively high official, right? Quite far up in the hierarchy. The Mormon approach is somewhat different, but a bishop is certainly somebody who presides over a congregation and runs it. And Romney was a bishop of a Mormon congregation in the suburbs of Boston, and his activities there were already open to question. So Romney says, quote, "I believe in my Mormon faith, and I endeavor to live by it. My faith is the faith of my fathers." He's in the tradition. "I will be true to them and to my beliefs. Some believe that such a confession of faith will sink my candidacy. If they are right, so be it." Well, you can get the idea now. He's saying, I'm not alien to this tradition, but I'm an integral part of it. I love my faith. He says this again and again. I believe in my faith. I love my faith, and I would no way, shape, or form distance myself from my faith or from the fundamental beliefs of my faith. I love my church. I am proud of my church. Now, this is quite adamant, right? You don't find things like, John F. Kennedy saying, I'm gung-ho Catholic. I'm 1,000% for the Pope. You don't have that. But with Romney, here you do. All right, fine. That, I think, means that this is eminently reasonable for us to look into. So let's look into it. Let's go right to the heart of the matter. Once you look at the history of the Mormon Church, you realize you're not just dealing with a church which is not Christian, not Jewish, not Muslim. It's nothing of any of those. It is sui generis, right? It is in a class by itself. The Mormon Church is unique, and it announces itself as the negation of every existing religious institution in the world. When the angel Moroni, when God and Jesus appeared to Joseph Smith, as he tells it, in the area of Palmyra, New York, around 1820, Joseph Smith says, "What church should I join?" Jesus Christ says to him, "None, because they're all wrong. None of them is any good." And ultimately, they're going to tell him to found his own church. So, this also means, by the way, that if you're a member of a sectarian organization which is aggressive and has a grievance, this is likely to prove more lasting in influence than if you're a member of a large established church which is mainstream and sated and moderate and which people join for business reasons, or simply, if you're living in Southern Europe, you might become a Roman Catholic just because this is the way it is. But this is different. This is an aggressive sect with a mission. Now, in the case of Joseph Smith, right, this is the prophet. We'll talk about his theology maybe in coming weeks, but right now we want to focus on the political part, because that is really the starting point. The Mormons say there's no distinction between the political side and the religious side, right? It's got to be the kingdom of God all the way. Well, Joseph Smith attempted to create the kingdom of God in upstate New York, then in Kirtland, Ohio, then in Missouri, driven out of all of those. Then he tries it in Nauvoo, it's written Nauvoo, Illinois, on the Mississippi River, and he was mobbed, certainly. He was the victim of mob violence. He was assassinated by a mob in June of 1844 in the midst of his presidential campaign. He was a presidential candidate, and I think it's pretty clear that the goal of his presidential campaign was to secure the defeat of Henry Clay of Kentucky, the leading U.S. patriot, the best candidate that was available at the time. That the effect of Joseph Smith's candidacy, whatever was going through his head, and I'll try to show that I think he was pushed into it by other forces, the effect of Joseph Smith would have been to weaken the Henry Clay candidacy, the Henry Clay American Whig American system candidacy. So we're perfectly justified in treating Joseph Smith as a political operative. For heaven's sake, he was a presidential candidate in 1844. He's also king of the kingdom of God. He demanded that he be put in charge of the U.S. military forces in the whole area of the Mississippi River Valley and so forth. But anyway, he ends up getting assassinated in June of 1844. Now, as a result of this, and it's not just Joseph Smith, it's also his brother, Hiram Smith, Carthage, Illinois, June 1844, the two of them assassinated. This is the origin of a grievance. This is, if you will, the origin of a blood feud. It is a vendetta of the Mormons against the United States of America. It is a reason to hate. It is a hatred that has to be passed on to the generations. And I am not just making this up. After Joseph Smith was killed, there was a power struggle, and out of this emerged triumphant Brigham Young, who was a close associate of Joseph Smith, a polygamist, all of these other things. But Joseph Smith becomes the St. Paul, if you will. Apologies to St. Paul. The St. Paul of the Mormons is Brigham Young. He's the one who takes this body of prophecies and revelations and writings and makes this into a well-oiled organizational machine. Right? He's mainly an organizer and a political leader, so we can treat him as political too. He's governor of Utah Territory, and he makes the revenge of the Mormons against the United States an article of faith, which is included in the liturgy of divine services every week of the year. And we'll get back to this in just a minute. on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So we're looking at Bishop Romney's tradition, the one he says he loves, the faith of his fathers. He's in love with the tradition. He's governed by the tradition. So let's look at the tradition. And as we were saying, after the assassination of Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram in Carthage, Illinois, by a mob in June of 1844, Brigham Young, who had emerged victorious from this faction fight, leadership struggle inside the Mormon hierarchy, changed the liturgy. In other words, the divine service. They called it the endowment. The temple endowment means what we would call in other contexts the liturgy, right? What the rite. So inserted into the rite or liturgy of the Mormon Church is something called the oath of vengeance. The oath of vengeance. And here's how it goes. This is I think, a scholarly consensus that this is what they swore to. This, by the way, comes from a guy called Berger. It's called David John Berger, The Mysteries of Godliness, A History of Mormon Temple Worship. This is a scholarly account, right? Not inflammatory. Here's what you have to do. And so it's like saying, I believe in God, but in this case it's the following. You and each of you do covenant and promise that you will pray and never cease to pray to Almighty God to avenge the blood of the prophets, that means Joseph Smith and Hiram Smith, upon this nation, the United States of America. How about that? Pray to Almighty God to avenge the blood of the prophets on this nation, U.S., and that you will teach the same to your children and to your children's children unto the third and fourth generation. Now, this is not a metaphor or plea to God to do something. It is the pledge of armed struggle. In 1849, William Smith, the surviving brother of Joseph Smith, right, the slain prophet, he had become, he had been alienated from Brigham Young because Brigham Young was dictatorial, right? He wanted all the power for himself. He was a tyrant. William Smith, in 1849, warned the President of the United States, Zachary Taylor, Whig, about Mormon activities by now out in Salt Lake City, Deseret, and the Great Basin. And he says, Brigham Young has led 1,500 Mormon saints in swearing to avenge the blood of Joseph Smith on this nation and to carry out hostilities against the nation and to keep the same intent a profound secret now and forever. Now we have Increase and Maria Van Dusen. These are two Mormons that quit, right? They're ex-Mormons. These are propagandists. So this we take with a grain of salt, but it converges on the same thing. By the way, disgruntled people who leave an organization and tell stories, some of it's baloney, some of it's not. You can't just say, oh, no, we won't listen to anything because you're a disgruntled renegade from this organization. Here's the Van Dusen account of the Oath of Vengeance. Quote, we are required to kneel at this altar where we have an oath administered to us to this effect, that we will avenge the blood of Joseph Smith on this nation and teach our children the same. They tell us that the nation has winked at the abuse and persecution of the Mormons and the murder of the prophet in particular. Therefore, the Lord is displeased with this nation, the U.S., and means to destroy it. And this is the excuse for forming this league or conspiracy. All right. Now, it also turns out that the moment when this is built in, if you want to go up in the Mormon hierarchy, you have to go to the Aaronic, the priesthood of Aaron, the level of Aaron, and you got to go beyond that. You've got to go then to the Melchizedek priesthood, first degree and second degree. If you want to get to the second degree of the Melchizedek priesthood, you've got to swear the following, quote, for allowing persecutions of the saints and not avenging Joseph Smith's murder, those present vowed everlasting enmity towards the United States and promised to inspire their children with this spirit. Then we have the very interesting Anne Eliza Young. We know her, right? The book is the recent book is called The 19th Wife. It's a book and a movie. We saw it on Lifetime Movie Network. The 19th Wife. This is actually worth seeing because it's got flashbacks to Brigham Young. So Anne Eliza Webb became Anne Eliza Young when she was forced to marry the polygamist Brigham Young. She then got a divorce for non-support, sued him for non-support. She wrote a whole book called Wife Number 19 about what goes on in Salt Lake City. And she says, quote, "We swore also to entertain an everlasting enmity to the United States government and to disregard its laws as far as possible. We swore that we would use every exertion to avenge the deaths of our prophet Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram on the Gentile race." Gentile, in this case, means everybody who's not a Mormon, including Jews, interestingly. You can be a Jew for the world, but for the Mormons, you're a Gentile. If you're not a Mormon, you're a Gentile. Upon the Gentile race, by whose means they were brought to their unhappy fate, and to teach our children to foster this spirit of revenge also. And we swore never to reveal the mysteries of the endowment house. Well, it's too late. It's out of the bag. Later on, in 1889, we had some immigrants who came to the United States. They wanted then to become citizens, but it was found that they had taken the Mormon oath of vengeance, and in this court proceeding, these people were denied citizenship, saying, "You have sworn an oath against the United States. You can't be a citizen." Then this became also a question: do you allow the Mormon Senator Reed Smoot to come into the Senate if part of his background is not just that he supports polygamy, foments polygamy, but that he's got this pledge, essentially, to wage war against the United States. And they had some witnesses, right, in the Senate hearings. They had one guy come in and say, we were forced to swear that you and each of you will never cease to importune high heaven for vengeance upon this nation, U.S., for the blood of the prophets who have been slain. So, did this ever change? Well, in 1919, they appointed a committee, and by 1927, the word went out that it was time to change the liturgy, change the temple endowment, the ceremony, the rite, and remove all reference to retribution. No more talk about avenging the blood of the prophets. And later, when we had the Franklin D. Roosevelt, whom the Mormons, the hierarchy hated, but apparently the rank and file actually voted for, Roosevelt launched the Good Neighbor policy towards Latin America. We can debate that. But the Good Neighbor policy, the Mormons said, why don't we call our getting rid of the oath of vengeance against the United States a Good Neighbor policy? So we want to know how sincere, like everybody else, right, the Mormons have exoteric and esoteric, right? The exoteric side of your operation is what you show the world, right? It's your public posture, your propaganda, right? Your public image. The esoteric part is the hidden part, right? This is what goes on in the secret councils. And in Mormon parlance, they don't use these terms, but they say shelf doctrines. The shelf doctrines are the esoteric side of things. Esoteric, what you hide. In this case, the Mormons say, put that on the shelf and don't talk about it. So it means that some of these beliefs are cultivated by the inner elite, but not by the rank and file, right? The average foot soldier doesn't know, but the capo dei capi knows, okay? So esoteric shelf doctrine. Does the oath of vengeance live on as a shelf doctrine? Hey, interesting question. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Now, the idea, therefore, is that the thrust of the Mormon Church is to create a separate country, separate political entity. They say we're not Americans, we're not Gentiles, we're the Mormons, we're the saints. We could get very interesting remarks from Indians out in the Great Basin who say American good, Mormon bad. They see that they're being treated in a different way. But now let's look at beyond the oath of vengeance, which we've at least sketched. Let's go on now to the infamous White Horse prophecy. This is highly relevant. We have an article, we have a number of biographical sources that when Mitt Romney was in prep school and in college during the 1960s, he was widely considered to be the chosen vehicle for the fulfillment of Joseph Smith's White Horse prophecy. Now, the White Horse prophecy is another shelf doctrine, cultivated by the inner elite, not known or discounted by the massy mass of foot soldiers and the normal, the rank and file. But at the top, I'm sure, cultivated. And the idea was that the common gossip in the prep school and in the university, especially when he got to Brigham Young University. Brigham Young University, named after a hardened traitor, and boy, we'll learn about him in the coming weeks. Romney attended BYU. He sent his 5 sons, all of them, to BYU. This is not a good sign. It would be like having Aaron Burr University. And I know there are people at Princeton who'd like to call it Aaron Burr University, but they just haven't succeeded. But BYU is there. Here's the other prophecy, the White Horse prophecy. We're now talking May 1843. So Joseph Smith has a little bit over a year to live. He's about to run for president, but he's still not doing it. He reviews a military parade because, of course, he's a lieutenant general. He likes to be called General Smith. And he's talking to these 2 guys, Edwin Rushton and Theodore Turley, and he tells them it's time for a prophecy. Let's quote Joseph Smith a little bit. I want to tell you something of the future. I will speak in a parable like unto John the Revelator, St. John the Divine, the Revelation, the Apocalypse. You will go to the Rocky Mountains, and you will be a great and mighty people established there, which I will call the White Horse of peace and safety. Now, this is years before the Mormons set out for Salt Lake City. That's in 1847, more or less. Now we're 4 years earlier. Joseph Smith is still alive, and they're still actually hanging on in Nauvoo, Illinois, on the Mississippi River. But of course, the whole thrust of these places is they want to go west, right? Go west, young man. And Joseph Smith, creature of the times to that extent, goes with it. So the White Horse of peace and safety. So this is 4 years before the Mormon exodus to the Rocky Mountains. Quote, your enemies will continue to follow you with persecutions, and they will make obnoxious laws against you in Congress to destroy the White Horse. The White Horse is clearly the Mormon operation, Mormon power. But you will have a friend or 2 to defend you and get the worst parts of the law, so they will not hurt you so much. He says you've got to keep your political pressure on Congress, even if it doesn't seem to be working. You must continue to petition Congress all the time, but they will treat you like strangers and aliens, and they will not give you your rights, but they will inflict strangers on you as commissioners. Naturally, the Mormon idea was wherever you go, the government officials, the federal officials, all have to be Mormon. So, no, that's not how it works. Now, here's the key part. You will see the Constitution almost destroyed. It will hang like a thread, as fine as a silk fiber. Now, this is a very commonplace. It's a trope, a meme of Mormon rhetoric and folklore. The Constitution hangs by a thread, and you will go in and save it. Now, is this the goal of the Romney campaign? Now, he goes on. I love the Constitution. It was made by the inspiration of God, and it will be preserved and saved by the efforts of the White Horse and by the Red Horse will combine in its defense. Now, this is interesting. The typical Mormon position, and you can see that this has affected right-wing thinking everywhere west of the Mississippi and now beyond. It's essentially, you find it everywhere. To say, I love the Constitution, I hate the government, I hate everybody in it. And these are black and white. The Constitution, all good. Government, all bad. Government officials, all bad. It's an unrealistic Manichaean outlook. The Constitution, there are problems in the Constitution. There are also positive forces inside the government. It just doesn't work this way. But this is the typical rhetorical stance today of the libertarian. I love the Constitution. I hate the government. And then the next step is with Joseph Smith. And I'm a secessionist. I love the Constitution, and I want to secede from it. Now, we've got the white horse. That's the Mormons. Who's the red horse? Oh, my gosh. It's the British Empire. And later on in the same prophecy, he says, one of the peculiar features of England is the established redcoat, a uniform making so remarkable a target to shoot at, and yet they have conquered wherever they have gone. The reason for this will be known to them someday, as is seen through the different colors threading through history. The lion and the unicorn of England come from there being so much blood of Israel in that nation. So the red horse is the British Empire, and these are the British Israelites. This is one of the tribes of Israel. So the red horse is the London oligarchy, and there is this notion of the British Israelites at the time. There's a bunch of writers. The population of the British Isles thought to be direct descendants of at least one of the 10 lost tribes, or maybe all of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Joseph Smith, by the way, said he claimed to be from the Hebrew patriarch Ephraim, and later on, if you became a Mormon, they would assign you to one of the tribes. I think you're one of these lost tribes, and they'd tell you the name of it. Now, is this the background for the Romney-Netanyahu alliance? That's food for thought. So the red horse is going to help the white horse save the Constitution. This is what he says. I love the Constitution and so forth. And by the efforts of the white horse and the red horse, they're going to combine in its defense. The red horse. So what we see, though, is the Mormons and the British against the United States. Quite an interesting idea, and this is the reality. This is the reality. Then he goes on. The white horse will find the mountains full of minerals out in the Great Basin, and they will become rich, always interested in money digging. You will see silver piled up in the streets, and you will see gold shoveled up like sand, always focused on this form of wealth. This is, 5 years before the California Gold Rush. The California Gold Rush, Sutter's Mill, 1848. This is still in the future. Anyway, it goes on, and we'll talk about this more. What we're going to get is that the outcome of this is that the white horse and the red horse take over the world and save civilization, and the main enemy is Russia, according to the white horse prophecy. And Romney, of course, has said that the main geopolitical foe of the United States is Russia. So what I'm wondering is, to what extent is Romney bound by the oath of vengeance? And to what extent is Romney attempting to carry out the white horse prophecy? And we'll have much more about this. Watch Tarpley.net, and you'll probably find a way to learn more about this research in the coming weeks. We'll see you next week on World Crisis Radio. Russia, and when you've got China, and when you've got India and Pakistan also, I think, abstained on that vote. Certainly South Africa did. Then you're not isolated. The big news is Syria is not isolated. Syria is less isolated. And, of course, it means the failure, the ignominious failure of the hysterical witches of aggression, Hillary Clinton, Susan Rice, Victoria Nuland, right? These three Eumenides of aggression. They've been rebuffed. Look what has happened on Hillary Clinton's watch. This is a real failure. Resign, resign, we would say to Hillary Clinton if we saw her passing in the street. So Pakistan supports Syria against foreign attack. It means no fly zone, no humanitarian corridors, no invasions, no nothing. Now here's who came to the conference, and I think this is in some ways an honor roll. Let's see if we can go through the list. Pakistan was there. Of course, Iran was the host country. Russia, China, Belarus, Mauritania, Indonesia, there's a big one, Kyrgyzstan, Georgia, Turkmenistan, Benin, Sri Lanka, also quite important, Ecuador, Afghanistan, what an affront to the U.S., Algeria, important now because of a number of things, Iraq, Zimbabwe, Oman. Hey, Oman. Is Oman peeling off from the lunatic coalition of the Sabahs? Well, maybe the Sabahs, maybe not the Sabahs even, the Khalifas and the Thanis? The Khalifas and the Thanis are going whole hog. The Sauds, the Khalifas, and the Thanis are whole hog for aggression. Sabah, we don't seem to hear from them. Sultan Qaboos of Oman seems to be having second thoughts. Venezuela, the leading country in Latin America from some points of view. Tajikistan, India, a huge presence. Kazakhstan, Armenia, Nicaragua, Cuba, sentimental favorite for many, Sudan, Jordan, Tunisia, and Palestine. Now, this could also mean a moment of reflection by the Palestinian Authority, right? By Abu Mazen there, that it's time to not be a member of the imperialist coalition. So that is quite a list, and naturally, nothing but scorn coming from the West. Let me just quote Mrs. Minister Carr again. She says, Syria needs political space to find a peaceful solution and reestablish its societal equilibrium. By engaging all sides, Syria must forge its own destiny in accordance with the aspirations of its people. So, no NATO bombing, says Pakistan. Quite a moment. Now, this conference had been announced at short notice yesterday Wednesday, by Iranian Foreign Minister. It is our considered view, Pakistan, that any outside intervention would further complicate an already very complex situation. It must be avoided, she said at this summit, which was attended by about 30 countries. Now, that's a big deal. When they do report that, they're going to be hysterical. They're going to be absolutely apoplectic and tongue-tied. A very big, important country, and in the region, has thrown its support on the side of Russia, China, Iran, and Syria. And you'll remember a week or two ago, we did an analysis of the vote in the United Nations General Assembly on the anti-Syrian resolution. And you'll remember that it was about 2/3 of the world supporting the imperialist resolution. And, of course, that included a lot of banana republics, let us say. But a whole series of big, important countries said no. And when you added the no votes, the abstentions, and the countries that simply didn't show up, they were not going to put themselves on the line, but they were certainly not supporting the resolution, right? Because if you could support the resolution, you'd show up. They didn't show up. With that, you got up to about 60 countries, and with the membership in the United Nations at about 194 or 195, 60 countries is about 1/3 of the world. So, and when you've got, we're looking at Syria, and we have a big development Today it's hats off to Pakistan. Go Pakistan. Long live Pakistan, and congratulations to the Pakistan foreign minister. This is Hina Rabbani Kar, and she has appeared in Tehran today being Friday, August 10th. Tehran is the scene of a conference on Syria. This is the answer to those horrible Friends of Syria conferences that have been going on now for several months, that have been vexing world public opinion. Today it is the Tehran Consultative Summit on Syria, a modest title. Several foreign ministers of big important countries showed up. Salehi of Iran, actually, Ahmadinejad showed up. We'll talk about what he had to say. But let's go through this conference, because I've been monitoring various Western media this morning. They don't say a word about it. There's nothing on Al Jazeera about this. There's nothing on National Public Radio. They don't want to tell you this. And the news is Pakistan is supporting Syria. Pakistan is warning against the dangers of foreign meddling into Syria. So, Pakistani Foreign Minister Hina Rabbani Kar is saying the following, and I quote, "Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking from Washington, D.C. We have a kind of a midsummer edition of our program this week. Next week, of course, we have August 15th, the Feriae Augustae, the midsummer holiday, decreed back in the Roman Empire, still big in Italy, France, Spain, Portugal, Southern Europe, Bavaria. Places like this tend to shut down on August 15th, the Ascension of the Virgin Mary. And, we'll mark it with a certain amount of background material. I'd step back from the day-to-day stuff and talk about the background of Mitt Romney. Talk about the tradition, Bishop Romney's tradition. We have to know where he comes from. He says he loves his faith, the faith of his fathers. Oh, how interesting. Let's learn more about that. Let's learn more about the tradition he comes from, right? They say biography is destiny, tradition is destiny. Maybe if that's the case with Mitt Romney, we can learn something. Certainly people would say with Mad Dog Bush the Younger, we needed to know more about his particular background, right? His alcoholism, dry drunk status, and then how his born-again Christianity was used to get him out of that, or at least stabilize him so that he could become president. How about that? So we want to know all those things. But going back with some historical depth. Now,